Thanks. Next speaker is architect Suresh Murthy. He is going to speak. His course material is third semester climatology. It's page 31 on the document.
Good afternoon to all of you. You go to the next slide.
Sure.
Yeah, my presentation is structured in the following manner. First, I have taken the existing syllabus in terms of the contact hours and the marks, distribution of marks. Then try to define an objective for the course as per the VTU fitment into the horizontal as well as vertical integration with other subjects. Course outline where existing as well as the proposed modifications or suggestions, I have tried to put it side by side so we can see the difference of where certain changes are recommended, and lesson plan for 14 weeks distributed amongst the various class hours. Also, the assignments which could be part of the course so that the students become more involved and the subject goes beyond the theoretical aspects to the actual applications, and the idea being that we need to integrate it to design because there is no explicit climate responsive architecture as a subject. So the design subjects, we need to have these inputs factored in so that the design is suitable to the climate in which it is being actioned. Beyond that, I am also proposing a methodology of how teachers could teach the subject by various skills improvement as well as various tools and assignments which could be given, which could be further detailed. And apart from that, the textbooks and reference books which could be utilized to base the whole teaching on. Next. So currently the contact period is 4 lecture hours per week, stretching for around 14 weeks is what I have assumed. I would suggest that we can break up the 4 hours into 2 plus 2 hours because 4 hours is a continuous stretch for this kind of a subject with lot of scientific and theoretical inputs is quite difficult to sustain. Also, it would help in giving the assignments within the 2 hours period, so we can have perhaps certain topics of 2 hours theoretical inputs and the other 2 hours could be assignments which could be based on graphs or based upon mathematical calculations or based upon certain tools which are available in the reference books. The theory marks is 100 and progressive marks is 50, which I am not touching or changing that. Next. Now the current objective what I see is to develop the knowledge and understanding required for understanding the influence of climate and on architecture, which would affect the buildings in terms of thermal performance, lighting, etc. Now this is only the inputs and understanding how it affects, but what are the design repercussions is probably not fully articulated in the existing one. So I propose that we change it to equip the students with a scientific background required to design climate responsive buildings. This will help us to tie up better to the architectural design subjects as well, where the climatology inputs could be utilized. Now, if that is the objective, we need to have the development of understanding. So basically clear-cut understanding on the various variables of climate, the elements of climate, as well as articulating it into not only the building design, but also the building structure in terms of the elements. Walls, roofs, composite walls, roofs with more time lag, etc., etc. Also openings, how to position them and how to get benefit of breeze into the building. I have also tried to define a planned course outcome. Once this study is done as per the structure given, what are we looking for an outcome? The outcome could be to gain knowledge about climatic factors, climatic zones of India, and thermal comfort. Those are most important. How we do that is usage of tools for climatic assessment, which can give guidelines and recommendations for design. The guidelines and recommendations could be translated with a subjective approach by the teacher into the various aspects of design in either the warm-humid climate, hot dry climate, or the composite climate. We can also look at some examples on the moderate climate, of which Bangalore is a part. The final one is design response to the relevant climatic zones with focus on maximizing passive design, meaning that we are trying to minimize the active consumption of energy and try to make the building more comfortable by using the natural energies available, so that your dependency on the active energy is reduced. So current sequence is listed on left side column. I have shuffled the sequence a little bit so that we have a continuity and a transition between each of those topics, and also emphasize some of them in a red color, which are basically additions. The ones in blue color, maybe in some subsequent slide, is just a rewording. So not major changes, but shuffling of the units as well as addition and emphasis on certain elements. So introduction to climate. Currently what we have is elements of climate, measurement, representations of climatic data, and classification of tropical climate. What we need to look at is the benefit of using climate for a passive kind of an approach. So you may need to get in some historical context into it in terms of buildings from India, buildings abroad, which could be a part of the initial study, which could then be understood and then looked at from the contemporary, using it in the contemporary architecture point of view as well. So climate, built form interaction, some examples from history as well as contemporary architecture could be taken. Next topic remains the same. When we talk about classification, we also, the classification of tropical climate is currently there. I think we need to look at characteristics of those classification in terms of air temperature, humidity, radiation, wind movement, etc., and how it influences buildings. So that portion has to be a little bit emphasized. Rest of the thing for current sequence 1 is the same. I am bringing the sequence 6 up because once the introduction to climate is done, it's basically you define what is a what is a global climate, macro climate, and then we are coming to site climate. So site planning should actually flow in that order. And site planning as an extension to elements of climate would be beneficial, because this is also part of a landscape architecture basic foundation, where you're talking about site and elements to be used on site and juxtapositioning, as well as taking best of the breeze, as well as reducing the reflection of solar radiation, etc. So that is retained as it is, but brought up in week 2. So you have week 1. Week 2 has 2 parts. One is major climatic zones and continued to effect of landscape elements on site microclimate. Next. Now, sequence number 2, we have thermal comfort. So after the elements of climate is understood, we are looking at thermal comfort. Existing detailed coverage is given in the middle column. What we are additionally looking at now is an updated one, which is thermal balance of human body, meaning that how does a human being feel comfortable? What are the parameters which affect him? And additionally, we need to include one of the thermal indices by Central Building Research Institute, which is called Tropical Summer Index, which is more relevant for our own climate. And beyond it, we need to take up the thermal comfort for analyzing what are the design features required in order to heat the building during the winter to the extent that it is comfortable, and also cool the building during summer to the extent that it is required, for which we need to look at periods which are overheated. This is currently absent from the course curriculum, where we calculate based on either the corrected effective temperature or bioclimatic chart or tropical summer index, the overheated period, and convert it into a temperature graph. And the graph can be imposed on a sun path diagram. So the sun path diagram follows next, based on which you can do the orientation of the building and the shading design. So this is week 3 and 4. So the next one is the 7th element in sequence being brought up, because now we need to look at solar radiation, how it heats up the building, and what is the relationship with the overheated period or the underheated period. So the sun path, use of solar charts. The updated proposal is that you can actually focus on solar geometry and design for orientation. As you change the orientation of the building, it's well known that heating and cooling would change, and also you can get more breeze into the building, whatever is available externally. So this is proposed in week 5. Now the sequence number 3 is brought in here, which is the thermal performance of buildings after the sun path diagram is used for a conceptual orientation. Now it is the time to evaluate the building in terms of its own performance. So here we have properties of materials, and grouping of materials, composite materials, etc. for walls and floors, which are to be looked into, walls and roofs, which have to be looked into. In addition to that, the effect of various types of heat gains in convection, conduction, transmittance, as well as the sole air temperature, which is radiation and temperature together, as well as for glazing, the solar gain factor has to be added. It's currently not seen in the detailing of the course content. So this comes in week 6. Then the computation of heat gain and heat loss, which involves mathematical aspects as well as scientific aspects, wherein you have to find out the U value of a material, and then using various graphs you can infer about the steady state heat transfer. Also the effect of density, insulation and cavity walls has to be integrated, which is very much required from the design point of view for walls facing west, east and certain walls facing north as well. This comes in week 7 and week 8 and requires a 2-week time frame for the mathematical concepts to be understood along with the scientific aspects and the application of it. Next please. Then comes the shading device. So once the overheated period concept is known and understood, then the time during which the shading is required is also well established. So the design of the shading device with respect to the sun path or the position of the sun can be brought in here, and conceptual design can be done, as well as the dimensioning of the devices could also be done for all the different orientation. This comes in week 9. Next is the ventilation aspect of it, which is very much required in a tropical country like ours, where air movement is very, very essential wherever there is a higher humidity, so that the body gets cooled down. So air movement around buildings as well as the portion of the air movement coming into the buildings has to be integrated, which is in red. In addition to that, when we talk about daylighting, I find it is not going into the required depth for a tropical climate. In a hot, dry climate, you have a lot of glare situations where you need to actually control the daylight coming in, while as in a warm, humid climate, you need to have the daylight coming from the northern side and not from the other direction, so that the glare is avoided. And the amount of daylight available also varies from a climatic zone to a zone, so that needs to be understood. And the importance of north lighting as well as clear story lighting has to be brought in here, which comes in week 12. Finally, the concepts understood about the air temperature, humidity, wind movement, radiation, etc. has to be brought into what are called as design features, which could be utilizing them. I think we have 3 zones which are hot, dry, warm, humid and composite climate. They can be retained as it is because these are the 3 contrasting zones. Hot, dry would be too much of high temperature with less humidity. Warm, humid is reasonable temperature but humidity levels are pretty high. So air movement is the major way where you can cool an occupant, and the composite climate is actually a mix of these two, but none of them are exceeding more than 3 to 4 months, where condensation also becomes a major problem. So these are the 3 unique design elements, natural settings into which the design has to be integrated, and this can be done through a literature study from historical perspective, probably 1 example or 2 examples from Indian history as well as Indian contemporary architecture, and 1 foreign example which falls into those 3 climatic zones. Those are the case studies which has been listed there. This goes into week 13 and 14 with the further output of this and understanding being carried forward into landscape architecture as well as architectural design. So we may need to look at how that could be done in terms of getting some kind of a flavor into one of the designs and the landscape architecture itself. Now computer as a tool also helps into setting up some of these simulations beyond what we have as a graphical tools given in the book Koenigsberger. So they could also be utilized for shading devices, shading envelopes, and realistically see with a rendering how the shadows and shades change with the position of the sun, which is quite important, not only for the buildings, but also with respect to topography, where there is a mold on the site or a hill on the site and there's a depression or a valley. Those could be simulated and made more interesting. So based on that, I have a further course of action in the next slide. So we have various assignments which could perhaps come in at the end of each of those topics. The first one is usage of psychrometric charts to relate elements of climate, meaning their dry bulb temperature, humidity, wet bulb, dew point, and the condensation. So the data for this numerical has to be provided by the teacher. Then computing Mahoney's table, which is given as a part of the Manual of Tropical Housing by Koensberger, which is the main book for us, which could be utilized to evaluate the environment in each of those 3 climatic zones. Then plotting the temperature isoplates and transferring it to a solar chart where you can find out the overheating period and underheating period. This could be used for the shadow and sun shading devices. And then heat loss and heat gain in buildings using a steady state concept, which involves only the external temperature and the U value or the transmittance value of the materials, which could be a numerical problem to evaluate buildings of different type which require either heating or cooling and are also conditioned by means of air conditioning. Proposed methodology involves literature study, as I explained earlier, for the relevant traditional and contemporary architecture examples, with a focus on the suitability to the climate. Then teaching scientific concepts by referring the books, texts and research papers, and numerical computations as well as hands-on exercise through graphs. The tools which could be used are lectures, of course, because this is a theory subject. When in addition to that, we can have seminars and pre-prepared PowerPoint slides, which could be capsule kind of a presentation, which could be very interesting for the students. And transparency and OHP has been slightly outdated, but some of the colleges still continue to use it. We can also test and learn each of these concepts through multiple choice questions as a part of the quiz whenever the topic is over, perhaps half an hour of quiz after one major topic gets over, and followed by usual tests with theory and numerical problems. From the teaching point of view, I think we need to look at honing the skills of the already faculty who are teaching and also get them trained on the subject and make them a subject matter expertise, and also perhaps integrate some kind of additional soft skills as a additional training to them for delivering the changed course content. The textbooks are currently, it is Manual of Tropical Housing and Building by Koensberger. There could be additional reference books which you could utilize. I think 3 of them are already available in the current syllabus. I propose to add up some more which are related to the topics which have been proposed for having a proper tight integration within the subject and covering the content in full. So there is energy efficiency buildings from Terry from India, building in hot dry climates by Balwant Singh Saini, as well as building climate at energy, which gives a lot of scientific approaches to building science by Marcus and Morris. And Mayan climate and architecture is slightly technical. In case of more details, it could be referred. So those are the additional reference books which has been proposed. I think the whole thought process has been here, as I told you, to integrate this with collateral subjects like landscape architecture and take it further into design, because climate responsive architecture as an exclusive subject is not available in the VTU syllabus. Thank you.